Okay, so we left off last time with the Coase Theorem. We were putting some pieces together on how markets might be able to correct themselves if we have the right conditions in place. So what Coase brought to the table during an era of the 1960s, Ronald Coase, let's just put, so he came up with this Coase theorem. What happened in the let's talk about the United States for just a moment to kind of put this in context. Great Depression happened around 30s. What happened in the 40s? World War II, okay, come back. We had the New Deal, government starting to grow. So kind of big government was kind of somewhat born out of the Great Depression and continued to grow. And so government intervention kind of grew a lot over this time period of the 1930s to the 1960s. And so Coase's paper was pretty influential in that it brought back attention to when the market system, kind of people acting freely with each other, might be efficient all by itself. And so we talked about the farmer and the rancher, and we had the issue. And the thing he really highlighted was this idea of property rights causing a lot of social problems. And so if we start to kind of look to first, like, how are property rights with whatever this crisis, whatever this problem is, are property rights an issue? And found that a large number of problems could be looked at and possibly addressed through the allocation of property rights. So the Coase theorem in general states that if we've got three conditions, so if one, I'm going to add little numbers in here, if property rights, and this is kind of what you had in your papers last time, if property rights are well defined, two, there are a small number of agents. A small number of agents. What's a small number? I don't know. Small enough so that people can get together and maybe do some negotiations or have a conversation with each other. So it's not really feasible to consider the city of Ottawa. It would be way too big probably. If we talked about there's an issue in the city of Ottawa, we have 13,000 residents. Can we figure whatever this problem is out on our own? It's going to be maybe a little bit tougher if the situation involves a large number of agents. But if we've got well-defined property rights, small number of agents, and then finally low transaction costs. Low transaction costs. If those three things hold, then private transactions will be efficient. And it would be kind of our notion of allocative efficiency that we've been talking about. Basically, no need for government to step in, or if the government does step in, the solution could be as easy as making sure that property rights are well defined. So with the farmer-rancher example we went over last time, we could give 50-50, which seemed kind of fair, but even more importantly, an unfair distribution would work just as well as what this tells us, which is kind of the interesting insight we get, is that even if we give all the land to the farmer or all the land to the rancher, it actually doesn't matter in terms of efficiency. The two will negotiate out. Society's best interest will ultimately kind of come out of that through negotiations. And yes, one party may be made better off or worse off depending on the distribution, but in terms of efficiency, that doesn't matter. So that's kind of, sometimes an overarching element to all of these policy measures is efficiency versus equity. And it's something that I've kind of focused some of my research on. Is economists are really good at this one, figuring out kind of what we think is an optimal or efficient thing to do. But oftentimes, this one is left to the politicians. What's fair? Well, what's fair to you is maybe not fair to me. That's kind of a subjective judgment call, right? And there are some things that economists can bring to the table in terms of thinking about who wins or who loses. But ultimately, the decision of equity is much more subjective. Okay, any questions or comments on Coase or Coase Theorem? All right, got some videos today. We're talking about kind of public problems and government involvement. We've talked about subsidies. We've talked about taxes and trying to figure out what would be best to handle issues of maybe public goods or externalities. And so this first video looks at ethanol. So, oops, this is not the one I want. This is apparently sweatshops, which we'll do later. Where's my ethanol? There it is. I think we'll get to the sweatshops later.
And finally,
okay, so I've talked quite a bit this semester on running cars on corn, right? And so you guys have heard about ethanol and all that. So this video is going to speak to those issues. We'll see if this works or not.
myth number one, ethanol is great. We made this myth number one because almost all the politicians are saying that this election season. They say we must use more ethanol to help save the environment. But is it